Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be focusing on President Abdul al-Sisi's official two-day visit to France upon the invitation of the French President Emmanuel Macron, the first of which started yesterday, and it was on Sudan to help it in its democratic reform, helping it in the development projects there. And today, the summit focused on really trying to help the economy of the African states that have been hit as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're going to be focusing on the two-day summit today, but first off, let's check out some of the stories making the news. And we'll start off with President Abdul al-Sisi attending a conference in Paris on financing Africa's post-pandemic recovery. African leaders and the heads of multilateral lenders are probing ways of financing African economies hurt by the COVID-19 pandemic and discussing handling the continent's billions of dollars in debt. The conference also discusses the transfer of technology to Africa, as well as the integration of African economies into the global economy. The gathering brings together some 30 African and European heads of state, as well as the heads of global financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund. French officials said the event is part of President Emmanuel Macron's efforts to recast France's engagement in Africa at a time the continent faces a near $300 billion deficit by the end of 2023, while trying to recover from the downturn. And on the sidelines of the conference, President Sisi and French President Emmanuel Macron and Jordan's King Abdullah II held talks in Paris over development in Palestine. Now, the trilateral meeting discussed efforts for a rapid ceasefire and prevent the extension of the conflict. Presidential spokesman Bassam Radi said that during the meeting, President Sisi promised $500 million for the reconstruction of Gaza following Israeli airstrikes. The statement said Egyptian companies will also participate in rebuilding operations. Radi said Sisi stressed that the meeting and its timing are of prime importance. He said it aimed to formulate a joint international movement by the three parties to stop violence and contain the dangerous developments in the Palestinian lands, which is leading to dire humanitarian crises in Gaza. President Abdul al-Sisi also said today that Egypt is looking forward to boosting ties with Portugal and activating joint cooperation on all levels. Now, the head of state was speaking during a meeting with Portugal's Prime Minister Antonio Costa in Paris on the sidelines of a Paris conference on African economy. Presidential spokesperson Bassam Radi said President Sisi praised Portugal's chairmanship of the European Union and efforts to support African issues. The head of state expressed his appreciation of the strong mutual coordination over regional and international issues of mutual concern. Sisi stressed on the significance of keeping joint coordination mechanisms. For his part, the Portuguese premier affirmed that his country is keen on boosting ties with Cairo on all domains. Costa said Portugal supports efforts by Cairo to achieve comprehensive economic development, and he noted that efforts by Cairo to prevent illegal immigration are highly valued, as well as its hosting of millions of refugees. The meeting also tackled tourism and trade ties and development in the Middle East region amid current challenges. And President Abdul al-Sisi attended the conference in Paris aimed at supporting the transitional phase in Sudan. Now, on the sidelines of the conference, Sisi held talks with a number of African leaders attending the event. Officials said the talks discussed a number of issues of mutual concern and means of boosting cooperation between Egypt and African states. And various state parties, syndicates and institutions, including Decent Life, announced on Tuesday their full support for an Egyptian initiative launched by President Abdul al-Sisi to allocate $500 million for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. Now, they thanked President Sisi and reaffirmed their full confidence in all efforts and political leadership to support the Palestinian brothers and opening the Rafah border crossing, to receive all injured and victims and concluding the reconstruction process in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, Tahya Masr Fund announced the allocation account number 037037 for Gaza reconstruction. Let's take a look.
The parliament announced on Tuesday its full support for an Egyptian initiative launched by President Abdul Sisi to allocate $500 million for the reconstruction of Gaza Strip. The parliament thanked President Sisi and reaffirmed its full confidence in all efforts of the political leadership to support Palestinian brothers and opening the Rafah crossing border to receive all injured and victims and concluding the reconstruction process in the Gaza Strip. It also stressed that the party would play its full role during the next phase in supporting the brothers in Palestine. The parliament also strongly condemned continued aggression of the Gaza Strip and all the Palestinian lands, which is considered a severe violation of international law and human rights treaties. In the same context, Minister of Endowments issued a statement to support the Gaza Reconstruction Initiative. It said it values President Sisi's initiative and stresses the great stands come from a great leader and a great nation. He called on all Arab and Islamic states and the free people of the world to seriously get engaged in the initiative. He said the ministry has on its part allocated £50 million from endowments finances in medical and food supplies to the Gaza people. He said Jerusalem's great value in the hearts and minds of every Arab and Muslim is ever established, as well as the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Also, the Coordination Committee of Parties, Youth Leaders and Politicians, CPYP, said it values the keenness of the political leadership on the reconstruction of Palestinian state. The CPYP said the political leadership in Egypt has been the first defense line for the Palestinian issue. It said it has been following with pride political and diplomatic efforts by the political leadership in Egypt to support the Palestinians in their existential issue and the right to an independent state with East Jerusalem as its capital. The CPYP said it extends thanks to President Sisi for allocating $50 million for the reconstruction of the Palestinian state. Moreover, Mustaqbal Watan Party announced on Tuesday its full support for President Sisi efforts in boosting the Palestinian people. The party asserts its boosting for the presidential initiative of allocating $500 million for reconstruction of Gaza Strip and participation of Egyptian companies specialized in the reconstruction process. The party also expresses appreciation and honor of the Egyptian leadership efforts in boosting the Palestinian cause and the Arab issues in general. Al-Ghad Party also announced its full support for the Egyptian initiative launched by President Abdul Sisi to allocate $500 million for the reconstruction of Gaza Strip. The party added it stands with all its leaders and members behind the Egyptian political leadership with all measures and steps it takes to protect security and peace of Egyptian territories internally and externally. The National Training Academy, for its part, said it will employ all its capabilities to support the development of young human cadres in Palestine in line with Al-Sisi's Gaza Reconstruction Initiative. It said it plans to train Palestinian youth to qualify them in various programs in partnership with major international institutions in order to enable them to get acquainted with the latest developments in the fields of management, leadership, technology, and other fields. It said 5 full scholarships will be allocated in the program to qualify executives, while a program for 200 trainees on leadership and management skills will be made available to Palestinian brothers through the Academy's online platform.
And head of the National Media Authority, Hussein Zain, announced on Tuesday the full support of the authority for the presidential initiative to allocate $500 million for reconstruction process in the Gaza Strip as a result of the recent events, with specialized Egyptian companies participating in implementation of the reconstruction process. The National Media Authority commends the stance taken by the Egyptian political leadership in opening the Rafah crossing border and provide assistance for the Palestinian brothers. It also provides relief for the injured and wounded, as well as receiving them in the Egyptian hospitals for treatment. Zain said that we commend these great positions which express support of the political leadership for Palestinian people and their legitimate rights. The National Media Authority affirms the continuation of providing media support for the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people to achieve peace and security in the region. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we're joined over the phone by Dr. Aziz, Secretary General of the General Federation of the Chambers of Commerce. Dr. Aziz, can you hear me, sir? Dr. Aziz, can you hear me, sir? Dr. Aziz, can you hear me, sir? So we probably are facing some technical difficulties. We'll be trying to reach him a little bit later. But ladies and gentlemen, now let's check out this report regarding President Abdul Fattah al-Sisi and President Emmanuel Macron trying to seek a new deal within the Paris summit to ease Africa's economic woes of $300 billion in debt by the end of 2023. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
President Abdul Fattah al-Sisi stressed the significance of international efforts to help African countries achieve economic growth despite coronavirus pandemic and facilitating technology transfer to African countries, as French President Emmanuel Macron hosted on Tuesday a summit of European and African leaders to seek solutions to the financial crisis in Africa. The president focused on various topics of concern to African countries, including the importance of enhancing international efforts to facilitate their integration into the global economy in a way that contributes to achieving economic growth amid the coronavirus repercussions. The Summit on Financing African Economies brings together 30 heads of state and government via video conference and in attendance. International financial leaders attending include the IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva, as well as World Bank Managing Director of Operations Axel van Trotsenberg. The summit was planned last year after the IMF calculated that African economies risk running into a total financial gap of $290 billion by 2023. President al-Sisi's visit to France also included holding a Sudan conference, where President al-Sisi focused on the importance of rallying international community's efforts to support Sudan during the transitional period. The head of state stressed that Egypt is keen to strengthen and promote relations with Sudan to contribute to achieving the interests of both countries, particularly in security, military, economic and trade domains. He underlined Egypt's keenness on participating in the Paris conference on supporting democratic transition in Sudan to back the Arab country in all fields. At the Sudan summit, al-Sisi promised that Egypt would continue supporting Sudan until it realizes its economic development and stability. During his visit to Paris, President al-Sisi also held summit talks with Macron to discuss bilateral relations that are witnessing a qualitative leap in recent years, in addition to continuing consultations over a number of regional and international files of mutual interest. President Sisi held a number of meetings with French officials as well as heads of some French companies to discuss ways to develop cooperation in trade and investment fields. On the sidelines of the visit, the president met with a number of heads of state and government for talks on boosting bilateral cooperation towards various regional and international goals. Economic growth on the continent, which experienced its first recession last year, is expected to rebound to 3.4% this year and 4% in 2022. African leaders called for an immediate moratorium on the servicing of all external debts until the end of the pandemic and the ring-fencing of development aid. They also urged the IMF to issue African nations special drawing rights convertible to global currencies like the dollar, euro or yen to provide them with the liquidity essential for the purchase of basic products and essential medical equipment.
L'économie du continent africain, cette année après l'année prochaine.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we have the honor to be joined here in the studio by Dr. Hany Aziz, former Assistant Secretary General of the UN and Special Representative of the Secretary General to the Western Sahara, head of the MINURSO Peacekeeping Mission, specialist in the peaceful conflict resolution, peacemaking and peacekeeping. Dr. Aziz, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you to you, Hany, for inviting me.
It's a pleasure, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start our discussion with my distinguished guests, let's be joined now over the phone by Dr. Aziz, the Secretary General of the General Federation of Chambers of Commerce. Dr. Aziz, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Dr. Aziz, now Egypt is allocating $500 million for the reconstruction of Gaza. All the states, institutions, syndicates, everybody basically is really backing this presidential initiative. How important is it in light of the tragic events that have been taking place in the Gaza Strip recently?
Most important, this initiative, His Excellency President Sisi, is a political message. This is the key element in it. However, our role as Federation of Chambers is to support that initiative. We are working on 3 pillars. We immediately took action. Our chairman, Engineer Ibrahim Al-Arabi, issued a decree where an action team was put in place. We're working on 3 key pillars. The first is mobilizing cash contributions from our 5 million members who are traders, industrialists, service providers throughout the whole country. The second thing is mobilizing in-kind contributions, which is more important at this time immediately, which is in terms of reconstruction requirements, building materials, and so forth, plus humanitarian aid such as food and medical supplies. And the third pillar is mobilizing companies, both engineering consultancy firms as well as construction and infrastructure companies, to be ready to be activated immediately to implement the reconstruction.
Dr. Aziz, now we've seen that President Sisi spoke to President Emmanuel Macron and Jordan's King Abdullah II as well, really talking about the Palestinian issue. When should we expect a political move? When should we expect more like a ceasefire? Things would stop and end in Gaza and stop seeing the tragic scenes that we've been following and seeing for the past few days.
I think Egypt as a country and President Sisi as a person, the only one suited to achieve this ceasefire. Egypt has achieved this a couple of years ago, and I think we can replicate the same process and start normalizing what's happening within the region. And I think President Sisi is doing a wonderful job activating the right tools and instruments and putting all the political pressure of Egypt to reach this ceasefire.
Dr. Aziz, Secretary General of the General Federation of the Chambers of Commerce, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Dr. Aziz, starting off our discussion right away now, President Sisi has been on this two-day official visit to Paris. The summit started off yesterday with focusing on Sudan, and now it's really focusing on all the African economies as a whole, trying to cut down this $300 billion in debt by the end of 2023. What is the significance of such a summit taking place in France, being initiated now? Is now the right time to start working on it?
Thank you very much for inviting me first. Let me say that I am here speaking in my personal capacity and not reflecting the position of any international or regional organization. But I want to say that the move taken recently by President Sisi and by Egypt in general, in the overall context, regional context and international context, is extremely important. First of all, Egypt is expressing its strong solidarity with the people of Sudan, with the government of Sudan in the actual circumstances, because they have stand with Egypt very much concerning the Millennium Dam issue, and we cannot dissociate everything happening.
Yes.
I know, for example, that President Sisi has met today with the president of Ethiopia. I like to say that the president is a colleague of the United Nations first, but she's in a very ceremonial type of position in Ethiopia. She has almost no power. She's a very soft lady, but she can reflect, with the coming elections there. Therefore, the move to support Sudan is extremely important, and it is a normal thing in the Egyptian-Sudanese relationship. The second aspect is the African aspect, and we know well that concerning the Millennium Dam, the position of many African countries is I would say, very mild. And the fact that President Sisi and the Minister of Foreign Affairs are deploying tremendous efforts to try to mobilize more votes, I would say, in support of the Egyptian position is extremely important. And it is not new. It is not new to Egypt to take the lead in defending African causes. If we look to Egypt history, and not only since 1952, even much before, Egypt had tremendous interest in the Nile Basin and in many situations there. Don't forget that the Albert Lake, for example, was called Ibrahim Lake,
yes.
And it was discovered by an expeditionary Egyptian. It was not military. It was more of Egyptian experts, in geography, etc., who discovered that. Therefore, this is a second extremely important dimension that Egypt is returning to its leading role in support Sudan, because Sudan is Egypt, Egypt is Sudan. But also Africa is Egypt, and we have to reinstate our very friendly relations with all African states again, particularly the Nile Basin countries, in defending their causes, especially with, as you rightly mentioned, the $300 billion losses due to the pandemic. And I think President Sisi will succeed. Why he will largely succeed? Maybe not totally, because it's a matter of negotiations and everything. But because France has also a very important leading role in African countries, particularly Francophone countries in West Africa. But it is also, I would say, I lived 18 years in Africa, in sub-Saharan African countries. And the role of France is increasing every day, because absence of other players who have no experience in Africa, except with Great Britain, of course. But the political role of France is important. therefore, you alluded to one of your speakers, why this meeting in France? Yes, because France has a role, and because France has very friendly relationship, which is, it's not an alliance, but it is very, very friendly relationship based on mutual interests. You noticed recently the sale of 30 new Rafale planes, 24 before, and the important thing is that Egypt bought those Rafale planes, the first batch. India followed, Qatar followed, many others. We were taking the lead, I would say, technically, commercially, etc. And I hope our French friends will remember that. This is very important. Egypt is retaking step by step without offending anybody else. That's important. And in alliance or in cooperation with, France, which is a permanent member of the Security Council.
And as you've mentioned, even the president yesterday met with the head of the Dassault company that is responsible for manufacturing the Rafale jet fighters. Now, Mr. Abdulaziz, Egypt has been working on strengthening its relations with African countries for the past few years, really working extensively, especially when it was heading the African Union. Now, you've mentioned that still their position regarding the Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia was kind of mild. Do you feel that now with such a summit, it would, and with a strong influence, as you've mentioned, of France and other European countries, this mild stance regarding the Ethiopian dam would change? Would they be more willing to support the Egyptian-Sudanese understanding and strategy of the operation and filling the Ethiopian dam?
I think this is happening, but this takes time, and we don't have time. The role of France here also, publicly at least, has been a very mild role too. And I imagine that President Sisi will talk to President Macron to make their position more clearer on this subject. But there will be improvement if we continue. But diplomacy doesn't change so fast. It takes, and history is made of decades and centuries. Okay, I hope it will never be centuries. Therefore, we are, working a little by little, step by step, but the effort has to continue. And this brings me to another question which is extremely important concerning the pandemic and the 300 million debts, and also the, I will jump on the 500, the half billion later, and on the Egyptian-Sudanese relationship. What we are missing is a monitoring mechanism. There should be an agreement on a monitoring mechanism for the implementation of the goodwill, good intention declaration made those last 2 days in Paris. Okay, there will be pledges made, but we know that there is a huge difference between pledges and effective payments. And in order to follow and put the pressure on the donors countries to alleviate the burden of debts on Sudan and help it on its democratic process and its in alliance with Egypt, a monitoring mechanism is important for the debts of Sudan and for the debt of the African continent in general.
Well, some of the talk that was discussed for alleviating this economic burden on the African states, they were saying, well, maybe we could slash some of the debt, just cancel it out. Some of the loaning and lender countries can participate with lending some money, cutting off interest rates from 6%, maybe making it 3%. And now you're calling for having a monitoring body to monitor the conclusions of such a summit and the measures that could be taken as a result of such a summit. How feasible are these measures? Because it's not just the African states, but also it was the global economy that has been relatively hit hard by the pandemic. So how can you find that balance?
Yeah, first of all, let's not forget that the world economy is suffering too. Therefore, France and the other donors, present in Paris now, do not have such a free hand. They have their local conditions. They have a huge unemployment situation. They're printing money, we all know. which is going to lead soon to inflation. We start to see this in the US. Therefore, declaring such good intention in a big meeting, we saw it before.
Yes.
What we need is to have a small body who can monitor, the implementation of this according to a timetable. Because to say, okay, we are going to absorb, this debt or part of it, and you spoke about some measures which are all possible. I will jump on this also to say why Egyptian role is extremely important on this. I think Egypt is the only country who has such excellent expertise in handling those matters in the Club of Paris. We remember in the 70s, start of 80s, and with the Gulf state, etc. There was marvelous condition obtained at the end of the day through extremely highly complicated techniques, which the Egyptian know and have the expertise, and they can play a major role in an advisory role to African countries and to even to the donor countries.
Yes.
And this is an important thing, the role we can play in providing the expertise, because we have it. Which the government will look around. I know so many of those ambassadors who played marvelous role in this and who have been very, very successful. I'm not here to mention names, but they can be found easily, and they have to transmit this expertise they gained to the new generation like yours, and to start, like in French we say, take le flambeau and start talking also. But all this need to be a bit more structured. We cannot and we should not leave it to mere discussion and mere verbal pledges. I like to see it on concrete things. When money is in my pocket, steps. I believe it.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Mr. Abdul Aziz mentioned earlier, now the Egyptian-French relations have been very high on the agenda of both countries, the French-African partnership, and President Sisi and President Macron were talking and mulling on boosting these relations. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back. Did you feel?
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron held an important summit covering means of boosting relations in all fields, promoting cooperation between France and the African countries, combating terrorism and extremist ideologies. The two leaders also mulled the latest developments in the Middle East, including the Palestinian cause. President Sisi also held meetings with senior French officials, including the finance minister, and heads of some major French companies working in the military, economic and investment fields. France has large investments in Egypt, and about 160 French companies are operating in the Egyptian market in many fields. The president also held talks with the heads of states and other senior officials participating in the summit on financing African economies, to be held in Paris Tuesday, including the premiers of Portugal and Spain, the Senegalese president, and the president of the Sudanese Sovereignty Council, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. During Sudan conference, President Sisi focused on the importance of rallying international community's efforts to support Sudan during the transitional period. President Sisi's participation in the summit implies a great deal of importance, including Cairo's historical and distinguished relationship with Khartoum. Also, Egypt's vast experience in Sudanese affairs and its full political and economic support to its Nile Basin partner, as well as its successful experience, especially concerning economic reform, were all stated. France is enthusiastic about holding the summit on financing African economies in Paris and is relying a lot on Egypt's role, whether in Sudan or the African continent. As for the summit on financing African economies, President Sisi will shed light on the importance of international efforts to help African countries achieve economic growth despite the COVID-19 pandemic and facilitate technology transfer to African countries.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Continuing our discussion with my distinguished guest, Mr. Abdul Aziz. Now, you've mentioned the Egyptian-French relations, and even for people who are not really aware of the historical relations, they can see over the past few years the amount of technical, logistical, and military cooperation between both countries. They're even helping us develop our monorail and the transportation system, many things. Was this a good sort of window of opportunity for Egypt to be one of the leading players within this Paris summit? And Egypt and President Aziz are having very much of a distinguished weight within this summit, even though it includes many of the African and European leaders. How effective do you think this political weight Egypt is enjoying in terms of its relation with France and in terms of its political stance within the African continent, to really help push forward the recovery, the economic recovery of the other African states?
Okay, let me say it's not an opportunity. It's done. We seized the opportunity already. What is needed is a follow-up of all of this, because if we don't have the follow-up, this will be 1 week of very nice meetings. Then there will be an erosion, a little by little, and the end result might I say, be elusive. Therefore, the opportunity, we seized it. We retake a role, I said it, with Sudan, definitely, and we cannot afford even, and we should not, out of a moral responsibility and effective interest, there will be resistance, by the way, even from big countries. There will be resistance,
Yes.
The country do not want, such close cooperation between Egypt and Sudan. No.
And would they be in the way of actually establishing a monitoring body?
I think it has to be, and it is up to the executives now to discuss all of things. The president determines the strategy, determines the policy, and it's up to the others to do the, I would say, not necessarily micromanagement, but to enter in such details to guarantee at least a partial implementation of the excellent intention expressed in a timeline. Because you tell we'll absorb the $300 billion in 20 years or 30 years. It will serve nothing. What I would propose, for example, among tens of other solutions, is to have a fair trade agreement whereby the mineral resources, extracted from the African continent, be sold at a decent prices, worldwide. It is true it's not the governments of France and other countries who exploit it, but it is their companies.
Yes.
It's multinational companies,
yes.
In fact, it's trans-border companies, etc., etc. But I am sure, and I know by experience, that the government can have a certain influence, to have a fair trade, like they have in bananas, for example, with some West Africa countries and Latin American countries. They had an agreement to have, a better deal concerning bananas, because the poor peasant need, after all, to have survive.
Yes.
The poor guy working in a mine in Democratic Republic of Congo should have an improved, life condition. And it's important to prevent illegal immigration, impoverishment, and many things. Therefore, I am sure that President Sisi definitely, and again I repeat, it's not just to support, has a human aspect in his character, and he look to poor people. He has to look to this also, and I think he should, and he is looking already about all the African basis of people suffering, not only the high-ranked official.
Yes.
But a fair trade for all of this might be better. I know that Western company will make less money, but they made already a lot through hundreds of years.
Yes.
Therefore, they will continue making money.
Sir, you've raised a very important point, which was about the private sector. Now, maybe even the countries, including France, would have this sort of political will to better things for the other African states. However, a lot of multinational companies are involved, the private sector. How can the states, the governments, actually impose and influence the private sector and the multinational companies to work for bettering the African economies? Because we're running out of time now.
You're raising an extremely delicate issue. In a market economy, the state cannot really impose.
Yes.
Particularly that most of those companies, I'm saying, okay, they're French or they're British. First, there is tremendous competition. I mean, in mining, for example, you have the Australian, very active, the South African, very active. You know, you have the French, you have Canadians, very active in all of this. And if France lose some of part of the cake, you know, the other will jump on it. The problem should be probably discussed on an open forum with an international convention to progress step by step into this direction.
Yes.
But definitely there should be a fair commercial practices progressing a little by little in favor of African countries, and including Egypt.
Yes.
Including Egypt. I mean, we export some agricultural products at very low prices.
Yes.
to China, for example, to other countries. Please go.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard from Mr. Abdul Aziz, this is a very good step for the benefit of Sudan, for the benefit of other African states, also for the benefit of Egypt and Europe, but hopefully the results and the resolutions of such a summit would be implemented and would be followed up by some sort of a monitoring body and institution, but definitely something that we could be all hoping for. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Mr. Hany Abdulaziz, the former Assistant Secretary General at the UN and Special Representative of the Secretary General to Western Sahara. Mr. Abdulaziz, it was a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you very much, Hany. It was my pleasure to discuss with you and to discover a very young, active, dynamic.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hany Saif. Thank you for joining us.